I first need to say is I'm speaking here today as James Button, jobbing solicitor. I am the president of the Institute of Licensing, but this is not the view of the Institute. This is me and my suggestion. I need to make that crystal clear. So what is the idea? Well, I have got this suggestion, and it is only a suggestion, that national standards for your industry, for the private hire industry, can be achieved, and it can be achieved easily, without any legislation, and at no cost. Now, that sounds reasonably radical, I accept. First question, why do we need them? Well, everybody agrees we need national standards. Even the government has said that they will introduce national standards. I fully appreciate we're in a state of flux, but they haven't put any energy behind that. They haven't put any effort into doing that. And even if they did, what would those national standards be? So there's nothing from the government. There is nothing in any of the political parties' manifestos. I failed to find any reference to hackney carriages, private hire vehicles or taxis in any manifesto. I am aware that there are whisperings amongst the Labour Party that if they get into power, and I am by no stretch of the imagination a political animal, if they get into power, they are going to repeal the Deregulation Act and stop subcontracting. Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, is very, very vocal on that. Now, whether that's the case, I have no idea. It certainly isn't contained in any official Labour Party documentation. So we need national standards. I think everybody's in agreement with that. Steve's in agreement. All the other associations are in agreement. I suspect a great many of you are. We have 300 or so licensing authorities with 299 different approaches. It's hopeless as it stands. So what's the solution? Well, you can lobby your MP. Frankly, you can lobby your MP until the end of time, and I honestly don't think anything will change. Please feel free to call me cynical. I've been in this game for 35 years. I know how politics works, or more accurately, in many cases, doesn't. So after today, we may have a brave new world. Tomorrow morning, we may wake up to see a new Prime Minister standing outside Downing Street, surrounded by the press, surrounded by fawning acolytes, and he will say, or she will say, no, they're all men, aren't they, the leaders? He will say, I have a vision for the future, and that vision for the future involves tough decisions by my government. And the first tough decision we're going to take is to reform hackney carriage and private hire licensing law, in which case I'll be the first one applauding. You can live in hope, can't you? And if you come from my part of Derbyshire, you then die in Castleton. So what else is there? Well, local government could actually solve this itself. It could solve it with support from yourselves. It is in the hands of the local authorities, the people who regulate you. Councils and Transport for London can make this change. How? Well, these are the processes or the steps that need to be taken. An authority needs to be identified that issues a large number of licenses. That authority will need to have a robust administrative system, and it must have good standards. An approach is made to such an authority to see if they would be interested or prepared to issue all the private hire licenses for the whole of England and Wales. And if they say yes, all the other authorities stop issuing private hire licenses. Now, can it work? Is there an authority that issues a large number of licenses? Well, funnily enough, there are one or two who do that. So there is the potential for that to be achieved. Will it have a robust administrative system? Well, if it issues that number of licenses, it should have a robust administrative system. If it hasn't, how the hell is it managing to issue all those licenses? So, to an extent, that should be self-evident. Has it got good standards? Well, it may have. I think what you need to accept, what we need to accept, is that if this is going to work, it will not be the highest level of standard. But equally, it will be a great deal better than the lowest level of standard. If you just go back to the idea of statutory national standards, they won't be the highest. They'll be the lowest common denominator, because that's the only thing that people will agree to. So this has got to be better than that. Why would an authority take that on? Well, it already licenses a lot. It's much easier to grow when you're already large than to grow from very small to medium. So they may well do, but there's another reason why they may do it as well, and you'll see that in a minute. And all the other authorities stop licensing private hire vehicles. Well, why would they? Because if they follow this plan, they will actually then have control over the vehicles and drivers that operate in their district. Whereas at the moment, when you've got remote vehicles operating, they don't have that control. You might say, well, this is getting turkeys to vote for Christmas. But it doesn't have to be if we can persuade local authorities to see the advantages of this proposal. So that's the proposal. How can it work legally? Well, as we know, a private hire operator can advertise their services anywhere. A booking can be made by anybody located anywhere for a journey travelling anywhere. It doesn't have to start in, pass through or finish in the district in which those licenses were issued. The ABBA proposals never got anywhere. And the trinity of licenses, as the High Court have termed it, the triple licensing lock protection, as the DFT call it, the phrase I've used for 30 years, all three private hire licenses must match. So an operator can only dispatch a vehicle and a driver licensed by the same authority. So that's the law. How then do we make this work? Well, first thing, find what I'm calling a principal authority. That will be the authority that takes on the licensing role. They accept that. And all the other authorities agree to become what I'm calling outlier authorities. They will still have a function. They will have a very serious function. After all, they will still be responsible for Hackney carriage licensing within their district. That isn't going to change. That can't change without legislation. And the great point about this plan is we don't need any legislation. We're not dependent on the central government. So the outlier authorities say, okay, well, we're not going to license any private hire vehicles, any private hire drivers. Can that happen? Well, the answer is yes, it can. Under the 76 Act, which is the outside London legislation, a local authority cannot refuse to license a driver, a private hire driver, or a private hire operator if that operator or driver is a fit and proper person. Once that test has been met, there is no discretion. They have to license that individual or that company. Is that a problem? Well, it might be, but every outside London local authority has a discretion as to whether or not to license a vehicle. There is no other mechanism. They can simply say, we're not going to license that private hire vehicle. Bad luck. Okay, there's a right of appeal and so on, but the point is they have that absolute power. So, all the outlier authorities simply refuse to license private hire vehicles Because of the trinity of licenses, those vehicles can only be licensed by the principal authority, can only then be dispatched by a principal authority private hire operator, driven by a principal authority private hire driver. Now, you might still have local private hire operators. This is something which the market would have to decide. Do people want to have a local private hire operator's license? If they do, fine, but they would then have to subcontract all those bookings to an operator licensed by the principal authority. So I'm not actually certain what the purpose of that would be, but it is there as a possibility. So how's this going to work in terms of testing, assessment of drivers and so on? Well, all those vehicles can be tested in the outlier area. They don't have to come to the principal authority to be tested. That model exists at the moment. It's perfectly lawful. The drivers can be verified and assessed in the outlier areas. Those outlier areas will be acting for the principal authority in that circumstance. The Local Government Act 1972 allows that to happen. There is no difficulty with this legally. Those costs are then recharged to the principal authority, because it's the principal authority that will be levying the licence fees, and the outlier authorities charge for that activity. In terms of enforcement, how does it work? Well, the officers of the outlier authority are placed at the disposal of the principal authority and are authorised as officers of the principal authority. Those costs of enforcement, again, are recharged to the principal authority by the outlier local authorities. Under the Taxis and Private Hire Vehicles Safeguarding and Road Safety Act, all English local authorities have to report concerns about drivers acting in their area, driving in their area, to the principal authority. That's a statutory requirement. But there's no reason why the agreement between the principal authority and the outlier authority shouldn't incorporate a requirement like that in relation to any operators, in relation to any vehicles as well. And because that act only applies in England, there is no reason why that agreement couldn't be made with authorities in Wales if the principal authority is not located in Wales. The outlier authorities will still enforce for the hackney carriage offences in their district. The illegal standing and plying for hire by a private hire vehicle in that district would still be prosecuted by that outlier authority. That has no implication to the principal authority, except, of course, if that driver is convicted, you would expect the principal authority to then consider taking action against that driver's licence, as happens now. So far, so good. And so far, I've been talking about outside London. Where does London fit into it? Well, there is no reason why Transport for London couldn't become involved. And in a way, that would make more sense, because there would then be a unified England and Wales system. But London is different, there's no doubt about it. London has different legislation, so it could quite feasibly, and I think, to be honest, quite practically, remain as an island. It will depend on the negotiations, it will depend on the view. So can this actually work? Is this just some flight of fancy from some bored solicitor who hadn't got anything better to do one Sunday afternoon than dream up a new suggestion? I really, honestly and truly believe it can. There is no reason why it can't. So what would the advantages be? Well, that principal authority, in addition to taking on the role, would need additional staff. There's no doubt about that. Those staff would be local government officers on local government terms and conditions, reasonable salaries, at absolutely no cost to that principal authority, because it would all be funded through the licence fees. Authorities can't make a profit out of the licence fees, but the licence fees can, as near as damn it, cover the costs of that private hire regime. So the advantage to a principal authority is to say to its members, its councillors, to say to its electorate, look, we can create, and I'm making the figures up here, 50 new jobs in our possibly deprived area at no cost. We might even be able to create 500 new jobs in our deprived area at no cost. There are a great many local authorities, you will know them, who would jump at that kind of development growth opportunity. The outlier authorities don't lose any staff. They won't actually be administering private hire licensing, but they will be enforcing private hire licensing on behalf of the principal authority. That may increase enforcement, which is to the benefit of everybody, because you good guys want the bad guys enforced against, the public want the bad guys enforced against, and of course they'll still have to do their hackney carriage work as well. So there is no reason on earth why there should be any redundancy whatsoever. As I say, there will be increased enforcement, and that increased enforcement has got to benefit everybody, including the industry. And it will reduce your costs. Why will it reduce your costs? Quite simply, economies of scale. We have seen this. Authorities that issue a significant percentage of private hire licenses at the moment are charging significantly less for their licenses than authorities that don't issue so many. No names, no pack drill. Now, what are the disadvantages? Because it's too good to be true, isn't it? Loss of local democratic control. Each local authority at the moment prides itself, I use the term advisedly, sometimes ought to be ashamed of itself, by having their own standards, by applying those own standards in a unified or completely disjointed fashion. That will go in relation to private hire licensing, and that will cause some angst. But I would suggest that can, to an extent, be overcome. What I would propose is that there is a joint board created, again, permissible under the Local Government Act 1972, which would be the oversight board for the principal authority's private hire licensing regime. That board would be made up of a nominated councillor as a representative of each English region and one from Wales. That is a degree of democratic oversight. It is a degree of democratic accountability. For those of you who might think, well, yeah, but I haven't got a direct contact with that person, I can't directly elect that person, that is precisely the scheme that is used for planning within national parks. So there is a precedent for that approach. Now, not all the authorities will join in. Of course they won't. There'll be some who say, no, we're not doing that. We are little snoddling district council and we will stick to our standards. Fine. It won't matter if a few hold out. To be honest, it won't matter if quite a lot hold out. Because once some start to join in, I think it will start to snowball. It's been suggested this reduces localism. Localism is the basis of private hire licensing. Well, actually, the High Court has cast doubt on whether localism is the basis of private hire licensing. In the Knowsley case, the judge was quite scathing about that as a view. But localism has already failed. In a great many authorities, well over half the vehicles and drivers that are undertaking private hire work aren't licensed by that authority. So that localism idea, oh, we control our private hire industry, has gone. That ship has sailed. That bird has flown. And of course, not all the authorities will agree. As I say, some will remain aloof. Well, let them remain aloof. They'll eventually, I would suggest, wither and die. They will become the last dinosaur. What do the public think of it? What do the public think of it? What do the public think? Question mark. We'll find out tomorrow morning. Do passengers want a specific local private hire vehicle? Now, in some cases, I think they may do. Authorities that, for example, mandate CCTV argue that their population want vehicles with CCTV. But under the law as it stands, the Deregulation Act, if the operator in that district subcontracts that booking to an operator in a district that doesn't mandate CCTV, they don't have to tell the passenger, the hirer of that, and that non-CCTV vehicle turns up. Now, there may be a handful of people who will say, I'm not getting into that, but the vast majority will say, oh, for heaven's sake, of course I've got to get into it because I've got to get to the airport, I've got to get to the railway station, I've got to get to work. So to a large extent, it's Hobson's choice. Would the public accept better overall standards? I think they would. I think if the public really understood the massive variation in standards between authorities that are neighbours, then I think this would gain acceptance. And I suspect that would outweigh local loyalty. There would still be local firms. Jim's Cars in Little Snodling would still be Jim's Cars in Little Snodling, but instead of being licensed by Little Snodling, I'd be licensed by the principal authority. I'd still have my local drivers, I'd still have the vehicles that we've always used. It's just a different plate. Has anybody honestly said, I'm not using that operator because they're now licensed by a local authority in the West Midlands? I don't think anybody has, because I don't think the public care. They just want to get there, they want to get there safely, they want to get there comfortably, they want to have a nice driver who engages with them. So will it work? Well, it needs a lot of cooperation. I'm the first to admit that. It will require compromises, and that can be difficult. The 10 Greater Manchester authorities failed over a spectacularly long period of time to agree common standards. So why would this work? It would work, it will work, if authorities accept that this is a better solution to the current chaos. Authorities are creating an awful lot of noise about vehicles acting remotely. Andy Burnham is at the forefront of that. He wants the Deregulation Act repealed so Wolverhampton vehicles don't work in Greater Manchester. Repealing the Deregulation Act wouldn't actually achieve that, but I haven't had a chance to explain that to him. So it could work. Ultimately, it's a question of will. As I say, in a lot of areas, the control has already been lost over a significant proportion of the vehicles and drivers that are active in that area. So could this solution be any worse? I really don't think it could. Because that local authority, in whose area at the moment those vehicles and drivers are active and they have no control over them, would suddenly get control over them because they would be acting for the principal authority. Now, I know there are one or two arrangements like that now, but it would be across the country. So it's got to be better. Frankly, could it be any worse than the situation we have now? Is the situation we've got now bad enough to effectively force local authorities to accept this as a solution? I would like to think they're not forced. I would like to think they would come to it voluntarily. I would like to think some of them would be dancing towards it. But then perhaps I live in a funny world. Do you want this? Yes, because a great many of you have already voted with your feet and have gone to those authorities that are licensing large numbers of vehicles. So I think to an extent that answers itself. So it's up to local government. This has nothing to do with central government. They don't need to have any view on this whatsoever. The DFT don't need to have any view on this. They are irrelevant for this process. It's local authorities. Your council needs to say, actually, this isn't a bad idea. Now, your council might be the one that's interested in becoming the principal authority. On the other hand, it might need persuading to become an outlier authority. But that pressure, ladies and gentlemen, can come from you, because you're the people who are licensed by them. And that carries with it a degree of power. So use it. Clearly, as I say, the government don't want to do it. The government aren't interested in reforming this. So if there is going to be any movement, and I mean any movement, I'm not just talking movement within the next 5 years, I'm talking movement within our lifetimes, because that's what I believe. There is going to be no new law for the foreseeable future, and I'm foreseeing my future at least 40 years, I can assure you. If this doesn't work, if this isn't taken up, the only people to blame are those local authorities who said, oh no, we're not doing that. Oh, we'll lose control. Oh, it's not very nice, is it? Oh no, we don't want that nasty big authority running our taxis. They will still be bleating about cross-border activity well after that 40-year period that I hope to live for. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening.